Chapter 33. The Ku'ula is returned to the burial cave. Monday morning was to be a very important day. This was the day that Nellie Ku would complete his task of returning the Ku'ula to the burial cave. It must be done with reverence in order to satisfy the Ku'ula and receive a good omen in order to get a quick recovery. These were the thoughts that pondered in Nellie Ku's mind. He was the only one who knew how to perform such duties. It was an honor to the Ku'ula to accept these duties by Nellie Ku. It was not taken lightly. As soon as the first rays of the rising sun struck the Ku'ula, Nellie Ku would pick up the Ku'ula with both hands and hold it out to the sun and ask for strength to deliver it to the cave to be laid to rest. The time was 5 in the morning, and it was still dark. The weather was clear, and the trade winds were blowing about 15 miles per hour. Mrs. Johnson prepared breakfast for the family. Nellie Ku bowed his head and said a prayer of thanksgiving. During breakfast, he did not say much, but kept to himself. He knew he had an important job to perform. The least error incurred during the returning of the Ku'ula might mean delay to the healing or death to Mr. Johnson. This was the most important step. That's the reason he was deep in thought. I looked up, left the table, and walked to the lighthouse. Then I looked down at the Ku'ula, and the school of fish were still there along the seashore near the altar. Then I climbed the iron ladder on the side of the building to a height of 40 feet. Upon reaching the top, I saw that the light was still on. Before I turned the light off, the sun must be on the horizon. I walked around the light and stopped. I looked around and had a clear view of the house and the Ku'ula below. In about 20 minutes, the sun clearly shone out of the horizon. I turned off the light. Then I walked to the wooden railing and watched Nellie Ku walk out from the house. I only wish I had had a camera to take a photograph of the scenery, but never thought of bringing one. As Nellie Ku stepped out of the house, he stood erect, like a soldier. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 160 pounds and had a waistline of 34 inches. He wore black pants and a blue and white polka dot shirt with a red neckerchief around his neck. This was the sign of dignity. From the top, I was the only one looking at him. Mrs. Johnson, the little girl, Domingo, and Elena were in the house. As he walked below me, I could see he was walking in a stately fashion. He walked straight to the Ku'ula. As he approached the Ku'ula, he stood and looked at the sun. He extended both hands up to the sun and spoke. I could not hear what he was saying. Then he stooped down and picked up the Ku'ula with both hands. He straightened his body and offered the Ku'ula to the sun with both hands extended out. Then he brought the Ku'ula to his chest, then to his right shoulder, holding it there with his right hand. The school of fish was still there. Nellie Ku made a right turn facing west and stepped forward with his left arm swinging. That very moment, the seawater within a radius of 100 yards turned into white foam like a whirlpool. The ahole were returning to the deep 3 miles from there. It was a sight to see, and I was the only observer. It was like it was being done for my pleasure because I was writing a book. Nellie Ku had a mile to walk up to the hill called McCauley. I watched until he disappeared on the other side of the hill. I looked again at the altar where the Ku'ula was placed. The sea was calm, and there was not a sign of any school of fish swimming. Then I looked with my binoculars 3 miles out and saw the school of fish swimming as the waves moved up and down. This was one of nature's secrets, that it attracted the fish as it was placed on the altar. I sat on a little stool and waited for Nellie Ku to return from the burial cave. It was about lunch hour when I gazed out and saw Nellie Ku walking back to the lighthouse. He was not walking stately as a soldier, but loosely, his arms swinging to and fro. I came down the lighthouse stairs and walked to the house. He was sitting on the step, resting his feet. I did not want to question him after the long walk. Mrs. Johnson was preparing a light lunch with the help of Elena. Domingo was at the lighthouse battery room, charging the battery cells with the motor generator. I went out to call him to lunch. Nellie Ku said grace. Then he spoke very cheerfully. I am glad this is all over, and I know Mr. Johnson will be well. The supernatural power has released Mr. Johnson. This phase of the returning of the ku'ula was the hardest. This is a ritual you must carry out and perform according to the rule. Nothing must be omitted. Then he explained to me, there is one good example. You are a Catholic. This is one religion I admire. Their ritual performance is strict to the rule, as it is written. This is the same as I do in my religion. I feel I have carried this out to the tone of the ritual asking mercy for Mr. Johnson, so that his injury will be cured. But the physical tension is great, and I must have my little rest after lunch. After lunch, Nellie Ku walked to his room to rest, while we sat at the table and talked. Domingo stood up and excused himself and returned to work. The little girl walked into the living room and laid on the couch. This left Mrs. Johnson, Elena, and me. I asked Mrs. Johnson how she felt now that Nellie Ku had performed the Ho'oponopono seance. She replied, You don't see me crying or worrying. Before this, my tears were dropping, and I was frightened because I knew the punishment, as I have seen plenty of this kind happen. But I never expected it here. When I knew, it was too late. He had already got the ku'ula and the fish ready to deliver to the restaurant. Now I have a feeling of relief that everything is all right. When Nellie Ku wakes up, I will ask him to stay one night here with us. I am waiting for the call from the hospital about Mr. Johnson. I told how I felt because Elena and I ate the fish and we were guilty knowing the fish was caught during the placement of the ku'ula, but we took it lightly. Nellie Ku woke up and walked into the living room. As he sat down, he spoke about returning home. Mrs. Johnson asked him to stay a little while until she had word from the hospital that Mr. Johnson was well, as the doctor had told her not to call. Nellie Ku said he would stay until he heard that Mr. Johnson was well, but he told Mrs. Johnson, I know that Mr. Johnson is going to be well because I have taken care of the Hawaiian side of the case. With this word from Nellie Ku, Mrs. Johnson's mind was at ease.